The reason why Article 1 is specifically referred to in Article 370 is
Yes.
that during that interim period, while other provisions could have been modified, it's very clear that Article 1 will not be modified.
Absolutely.
Which is a clear indicator of the fact that 370 was never intended to be permanent.
There's no question about any kind of secession, any second thoughts about it, etc. The fact that Sheikh Abdullah in 1972, after his prolonged incarceration, when he was to come back and form the government, they entered into an agreement, Sheikh Abdullah and Mrs. Gandhi. And it's interesting because that agreement provided for the fact that there'd be no question of you asking for an abrogation of 370 clause 3. The accession is absolutely complete. No secession arguments can be taken. That's also put on record, the Sheikh Abdullah and Indira Gandhi agreement. Interestingly, Indira, on behalf of Mrs. Gandhi, the signing of that agreement, which happened the day before he took over as chief minister, was done by Mr. Parthasarathi, who was a famous diplomat, but also was the son of Gopal Swami Iyengar. Many ways that you find overlaps throughout. But this history, I think, shows and resonates how from then, that date till now, the interpretation of 370 has been consistent without any departure. 370 clause 3 is the temporary provision. A choice had to be exercised at that point of time, which was done, and it was over and done. And the problem is the other way around. If I may just digress for a minute. 370 clause 1 says Article 1 will apply. You can't make any changes to it. And it starts with a non-obstante clause. 370 clause 3 also starts with a limited non-obstante clause, which says notwithstanding anything in the provision above. We are looking at it throughout while the arguments are on, with reference to the question of complete integration or the constitution completely applying. Why don't we look at it the other way around? Suppose you had some government at the center, which for reasons best known to them, have a sympathy to the cause of secessionism and say that, look, we will artificially create some assembly to be treated as a constituent assembly. They will take a decision whether 370 clause 3 can be utilized to abrogate 370. Now, when you abrogate 370, please note that Article 1 also goes with it. The other way around.
There is a problem, Mr. Shankanarayan.
Yes.
Article 1 is a permanent feature of the Constitution.
Absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely. Yes.
Now, what was the reason for Article 370, Clause 1, to contain a specific reference that Article 1 of the Constitution shall apply?
Yes.
Article 1 of the Constitution was in any case applicable because that's an embedded part of the Constitution.
Absolutely.
The reason why they introduced a reference to Article 1 in in Article 370 was for this, that during that interim period, when there was a power to modify the provisions of the Constitution, those relatable to the instrument of accession with consultation, those not relatable to the instrument of accession with concurrence, during that period, there would have been a doubt as to whether or not Article 1 could also have been modified with concurrence. So the object of putting that in Article 370 was to redouble the constitutional statement that Article 1 is a permanent feature of the Constitution. Now, if Article 370 was intended to be permanent, there was no reason to include Article 1 in Article 370 because Article 1 anyway is a permanent feature of the Constitution.
Absolutely, right?
That's one more. You see, when we refer to Article 370 Clause 3, it only refers to 370. It doesn't refer to Article 1.
No, it doesn't. Correct. But 370, which includes within it Article 1 compulsorily applying.
But that if one looks at it, the argument which you raised, if one looks at it, what you can abrogate is Article 370.
Correct.
Not Article 1.
That's what I'm
saying.
So
370 goes, the entire Constitution becomes, as it is applicable to all the states, will become applicable to the state of J&K.
Which is why, if I may just read that, this is not my interpretation, this is the President of India's interpretation, Rajendra Prasad's. His letter is here, I'll show you the extract. His interpretation writing to Pandit Nehru. But allow me to just show your lordship for a minute, 370.
You will never attribute to the Constitution the use of a surplusage.
Absolutely.
Right? Every word in the Constitution, we apply that principle to an ordinary statute of the legislature. More so to the Constitution, that you would never attribute to the Constitution makers any intent to use a surplusage or something without meaning.
Absolutely.
And the reason why Article 1 is specifically referred to in Article 370 is that during that interim period, while other provisions could have been modified, it's very clear that Article 1 will not be modified.
Absolutely.
Which is a clear indicator of the fact that 370 was never intended to be permanent.
I'm with
Probably your argument could be
I'm with you.
That after the Constituent Assembly arrived at an understanding, something further was left to be done by the Indian Constitution.
So
now, which was never done, and we followed this expedient of the COs. That's what seems to have happened. It served everybody's purpose. The government of India could get the work of the government done. The J&K Assembly could have those beneficial provisions of the Constitution apply to them. As the then Prime Minister Nehru said, that's now reduced to a shell. That's what he said.
That's true.
Now, as a result of what this seems to have, therefore, been a very convenient expedient of having COs to apply the Constitution to Jammu and Kashmir and progressively bring J&K into the mainstream and integrate it fully on whatever issues that were left out. But possibly, these are clear indicators within, intrinsic to Article 370, that these were in the sense of pro tem provisions until some further action would be taken.